Is it just me, or does every Sonic game have that one level that is just the worst?
I don't know if it's coincidence or some fucked up tradition, but today, right here, right now, I'm getting to the bottom of it. By complaining about them on the internet. This is the top 10 worst Sonic stages, judging each stage by how irritating or tedious it is, and within the context of the quality of each title. One per game, no special stages. This is my first solo top 10 I've made in nearly 2.5 years, and let's get started. It takes a special type of sucking to stand out as horrendous in Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, but Dusty Desert digs that little bit further to absolute rock bottom. Gotta go slow through the worst animated quicksand ever. Dusty Desert appears in Sonic Shadow and Silver's stories and not once deviates from the clunky repetitive mess we've come to know as Sonic 06. But we all know why this stage is really on here. That puzzle where Silver has to slap a giant ball through an obstacle course while only hitting it a certain number of times before it explodes. It's like a physics puzzle in a game without physics. Way too long and way too finicky. But I'm sure if you focus, put your mind to it, it's not so hard, and you can do it pretty straightforward like this.
I am Iblis triggered.
Guys, I think Sonic 06 is a not good video game. Unnecessary Amy section, unnecessary carrying Elise section, totally necessary zoom in on Omega's crotch section. Yeah, this is what I came for.
Dusty Desert is poorly designed and boring, and the only reason it's at number 10 is because it's from Sonic 06, and being terrible is pretty par for the course.
I can't say I was expecting anything special, but still, it feels like they weren't even trying. Metropolis Zone is one of those levels spoilt by a single aspect, in this case the enemies. They goddamn ruin it. Mantises and starfish, oh, I am losing the ability to even... They both fire really small projectiles you can barely see over the clustered background, seemingly always from just out of the view of the camera. It's an absolute train wreck for the eyes and ears and feelings. This is also the only zone in Sonic 2 to have 3 acts, because I hear this game was in part developed by the criminally insane. And it calls itself Metropolis, but it ain't looked like no city I ever saw. Just a bunch of pipes and elevators and crabs. The whole stage is a slog to get through, and if you haven't collected all the emeralds by this point, you can give up now, unless you want to spend your time sneaking through at a snail's pace trying to avoid the badniks before one of the green bastards appears from the corner of the screen and ruins everything.
But hey, at least the music's pretty dope.
Sonic Generations, because if we jerk you off with a sock made from nostalgia and childhood wonder, maybe you'll pretend to forget about everything this franchise did since the turn of the millennium. Then of course Sonic Lost World happened, and Sonic Boom, and now it looks like they're going at it again, the cheeky bastards. So Sonic Generations is mostly a great game, mostly as in all but Planet Wisp. What happened here? This was so good in colours. Somehow, the Generations remake looks no better, and in some areas worse than the Wii version, with its new dulled down and dreary colour palette. And the wisps that were optional supplements in the original are now required to beat the stage, so look forward to the janky-ass new mechanics and stop-and-start level design plaguing both playstyles, bringing your Sonic speed to a screeching halt. And remind me again why modern Sonic, who's clearly designed for 3D platforming, still jarringly swaps into 2D, despite this game being built around the concept of having distinct 2D and 3D gameplay. This is more a general problem, but Planet Wisp does have the longest, most finicky modern 2D segment, and it's all the worse for it. If every remade level was supposed to show people Sonic's highlights while making them hopeful for the future, having one this shitty just reminds fans this franchise has the consistency of a junkie's blood pressure. Brah fucking vo. Altitude limit. This one sure pushes me to my altitude limit. You know, that joke doesn't even work at all. Sonic Rush was home to many non-offensive levels, but it's when it starts to get hard you realise what you thought was fun was actually just holding down the Y button to boost and watching all the pretty colours.
Altitude limit introduces difficulty and the whole game just kind of collapses.
Insta-kill obstacles and pits go from sparse to everywhere, but it still seems to encourage the same levels of speed. Supersonic racing is cool and all, but you can't honestly expect people to have reactions this quick. And then you certainly can't go and punish failing to hit every jump with an immediate death. Miss a jump, there's a laser. Blow up a hoverboard, there's a laser. Hit a laser, there's another laser. stop. Throw in hoverboard flying and paragliding, neither of which give any room for mistake without dying or a learning curve, and you've got an unfair difficulty spike sharp enough to slit the throats of anyone who thought this was a good idea. And what's with the structure here? Usually higher areas are good and lower areas are bad, but as this stage isn't really based on anything, it's just kind of a bunch of rails in the sky, there's no indication at any point of how well you're doing or how close you are to death. So while most Sonic stages encourage speed, this one forces tiresome cautiousness throughout, rendering the experience an aggravating bore from start to finish. Labyrinth Zone is the poster boy for shitty levels in Sonic games. It's a classic, it's a Mozart, it's a Da Vinci, it's not good. The most well-known on this list, Labyrinth Zone has sure earned its infamy as one of the worst water stages in video games. Not only is everything super slow because, you know, water, but combine that with the god-awful design itself and we start to have a problem. Just think about all the best parts of Sonic games, the speed, the action, the adrenaline. This has none of that. Brace yourselves for a whole lot of waiting. Waiting on elevators, waiting for currents, waiting for bubbles. And when you're not waiting, or drowning, or taking in that grating music, you can enjoy some of the most arse-backward enemy and spike placements since Ninja Gaiden. Why, of all the classic zones Sonic 4 had to choose from, this is one they remade is beyond me. Impressively, Labyrinth Zone manages to go back on everything this franchise stands for halfway through the first game, with its insufferable combination of painful and boring. At least you know at the end of it you can enjoy a fun showdown with Robotnik. Oh, come on!
Hey everyone, it's me, Internet Superstar, and your host today, Countdown Bleck. How are you enjoying the list so far? We're about halfway through, I thought we could just take a brief intermission. Because the next segment makes me want to kill myself.
Oh, I got a great idea for a Sonic stage. Let's take the barely functioning rail jumping mechanic from Sonic Adventure 2, somehow make them worse, base 2 overly long stages around them where if you miss a single jump you fall to your death, then have you complete those stages 4 times to beat the game. That's how I like my Sonic, buggy and frustrating. Of the 2 levels, Rail Canyon is certainly worse, simply by virtue of having more rails. There are entirely too many rails. I can't stress how much I dislike the rails. No mechanic in any good game should only work some of the time. As you try and hop between 2 of them, as you are required to do multiple times throughout, there's half a chance you'll either jump off the rails and mostly miss landing back on them on your descent, or fly 20 meters to the side and die instantly. It's bothersome to say the least, and makes this the kind of level where you're not allowed to have fun. And refusal to commit yourself to the way the programming demands it be played will deliver nothing but game overs and a broken controller. I swear, Sonic Heroes would be such a good game if it weren't for the game. I love the music and visuals and story and concepts and even the level design, and hell, Rail Canyon would be a great stage if it fucking worked as it was supposed to. But it doesn't, so it's not. In the first Sonic games, levels took a couple of minutes to beat. The adventure games had slightly flashier levels, so they upped the length to 4 or 5 minutes. Makes sense. For Heroes, they wanted to differentiate the different difficulty levels, so they were much longer. Then Shadow the Hedgehog, with its bullshit mission structure, started really pushing the lengths up. But the worrying trend really continued up to Eggman Land from Sonic Unleashed, which on your first attempt can take over an hour. A fucking hour.
Very few things should take in excess of an hour. Levels in Sonic the fucking Hedgehog games should not take over an hour.
But is it a fun hour? No. You spend most of your time in super button smashing Werehog mode as they try to make him do platforming, and it's just not good. And the daytime sections, which in previous stages were some of the best Sonic gameplay out there, are taken mostly by awkward 2D segments and watching non-interactive Sonic do what some focus groups suggested would be considered cool. Given there is now an entire game set in a theme park of Eggman's creation, the one positive attribute to set this apart is now utterly redundant. I have to admit it's pretty looking, but that really can't save this whole big bunch of nothingness. Eggman Land tries being a spectacle, but really only amounts to nothing more than a slap and an inconvenience. Skydeck is great for those who hate themselves and everyone around them. I'm sure that would at least put you in the same state of mind as those who participated in the satanic ritual undergone to create it. Why exactly is this such a monstrosity? Let's start with Sonic Adventure isn't running on nearly a good enough engine to handle gravity-changing mechanics, and thus any attempts to make them are going to feel clunky and weird. Actually, it's hard to tell if the physics are changing or if the controls are just glitching when the camera is this level of atrocious. For a level so zany and out there in concept, it has impressively mundane design, with you spending most of your time edging over cylinders and retrending the ground of the same overly long corridors. But if you dare to take shortcuts or in any way create a path for yourself quicker than the required slog, let's just say best Sonic game won't hold up till New Year's.
Haha, nailed it!
The Knuckles variant combines floor tilting with an even worse camera and disgustingly clustered object placements, and the Tails version introduces flying and is there a word for breaking the already very broken? I like the idea of a kind of 3D reimagining of Sonic 2's Wing Fortress Zone, and much like Rail Canyon, this would be really fun if it worked. Skydeck is the perfect reminder for anyone who still believes Sonic Adventure holds up as well as you remember that it hasn't. It really, really has not.
If there's one Sonic game I just cannot understand the love for, it's Sonic CD.
I get that it came from a time where just showing all of the colours at once was enough to win Game of the Years across the board, but I really don't understand what people see in this, because all I'm getting is a weird, garish cluster of bad choices, with the mystical, wacky workbench being the worst of a bad bunch. The floor's decked out with enough bounce pads to make Boom feel inadequate, perpetually flinging Sonic faster than the screen can keep up with into whatever obstacle or enemy the game feels like killing you with. Most annoyingly of all has to be the grid of electricity covering most of the upper area. The speed you're moving at, combined with the spinning platforms and how the background adjusts to horizontal movement but not vertical despite the fact you'll be mostly moving vertically, makes this genuinely nausea-inducing. Most of the time you can't even tell where you're going, and it makes the difficulty beyond cheap. It's amazing how many individual, unique, awful decisions went into this disaster. The electric grid, the invisible spring pads, the floor, the ice jet, spinning platforms all make the stage worse little by little, and for throwing them all together into one utterly painful, excruciating one-on-one on how not to make a 2D Sonic stage, well, that's just too much, man! Sonic Adventure 2's treasure hunting stages definitely have their share of flaws, but I like them.
That being said, some of them are pretty annoying, and Mad Space can absolutely go choke on a chode.
What can be said about Mad Space? Oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. What good can be said about Mad Space? That's not a rhetoric, I'm genuinely seeking answers. This is one of the worst designed, worst programmed levels in any game I've ever played. How this mistake, this utter monstrosity, found itself into what was otherwise a reasonably harmless game honestly astounds me. Only some of the planets have gravity fields which you can somehow glide out of, at which point you're affected by the main pull of the Earth below that seems to have no effect on any of the platforms. Really, it only makes sense if you imagine all the inconsistencies are powered by the energy generated from the speed Isaac Newton must be spinning in his grave.
That's the smartest joke I've ever made.
In conclusion, everything feels weird and wrong. Sometimes by holding up, you just spin in circles because Sonic Team is good at developing video games. Moving on, Mad Space is way too big and empty. The radar's tiny range only helps when you're right next to the emerald pieces, so A rankings are completely luck. Though even if you've given up on rankings, finding the emeralds with hints sucks as they're all either lying or backwards. It's the culmination of shittiness, pointlessness, and aggravation that makes this by far the biggest waste of time and effort in this entire franchise. Then to top it off, it's followed by the worst boss in the game because, you know, God is dead. I actually love this stage, it's my favorite. You know, sticking glass shards in your eyes to see if it bleeds was a really good idea, I think. It's like playing through Mad Space on the go. You don't even need an Oculus Rift for this one-to-one gaming experience. Today was a good day for me.
Mad Space, more like bad space. Today was not a good day for me.
Hello everybody, and welcome to today's End Slate. I'm leaving this video bitter and broken, but you don't have to. Check out a previous video of mine. For more angry rambling, check out my expose on NES Zelda 1. For another countdown, what about my top 5 cave story songs? And for something completely different, my plea to Capcom to #localizeDGS. If you liked this video, give it a like. And if you didn't like this video, give it a like.